Today is 1.3, estimating sums. The essential question that we will look into today is how can you use compatible numbers and rounding to estimate numbers? Some vocabulary terms that you'll see is compatible. Compatible numbers are numbers that are easy to compute mentally. That means add together or subtract mentally and are close to real numbers. Also, numbers, we will be using those all day, as well as estimate. An estimate is a number close to the exact amount. When you estimate, you can definitely use this in your real life, like buying groceries, or if you're out with friends and you're wanting to figure out if you have enough to buy a movie ticket and popcorn. We use estimation all the time. The first problem we're going to have today goes back to the lesson that we did yesterday on rounding to the nearest hundred. So the question is, what is 475 rounded to the nearest hundred? So if I have 475, using the technique and strategy that we used yesterday, I'm going to circle the hundreds place because, again, it asked us to round to the nearest hundred, and then I'm going to underline the number right next to it, and that's a 7. So I know that the 7 is more than 5, so this 4 needs to turn into a 5 because I'm rounding up, because again, 7 is more than 5. Then I know that the rest of my numbers turn to zeros. So my answer would be 500. Here's another way that we can round using our hundreds, tens, and ones. And so if you would like to use this chart, you can. We are going to be rounding 287 to the nearest tens. So we are going to circle the 8 because that is again in the 10 spot, and we're going to underline the 7. Just like in the problem prior, 7 is more than 5, so that means the 8 needs to turn into a 9. The 2 stays the same because we're not rounding that number, and then the 7 turns into a 0. So my answer is 290. So with our lesson, we're trying to find compatible numbers based off of what we did yesterday. So what you're going to do is you're going to round these numbers to the nearest 5s or 10s. Usually 10s is the quickest and the easiest. So I'm going to look at 42. If I were to round to the nearest 10, that would be 40. Because I know that if I circled the 4 and underline the 2, 2 is less than 5, so that turns into a 0, the 4 stays the same. Let's try 36. So I'm going to circle the 3, underline the 6. I know the 6 is more than 5, so that turns into a 0, and the 3 turns into a 4. So 42 plus 36, that might be hard to add in our head, but 40 plus 40 is much easier because I know 0 plus 0 is 0, and 4 plus 4 is 8. So again, we're estimating to find these numbers, and we're using compatible numbers to make it easier for ourselves. Let's do this one. In your head, I want you to think about, you circle the number, which is 2 because we're rounding to the nearest 10. We're underlining the 3. 3 is less than 5, so that's going to be a 0. The 2 stays the same. Now this one's going to be a little trickier because it's 23 plus 99. So I'm going to circle the 9 because that's the tens place. I'm going to underline the 9. And I know that 9 is more than 5, so that turns into a 0. But I need to turn the 9 into a 10. So now my number turns into 100. So I do 0 plus 0 equals 0, 2 plus 0 equals 2, and 1 plus 0 equals 1. So my answer is 120. Now these next ones, these are a little more tricky, but we're going to still round them to the nearest tens, because if we round them to the nearest hundreds, they're going to be a little tricky because they're not going to be quite as compatible as they could be if they were rounded to tens. So again, we'd circle the 10, underline the ones place. That's a 3, and that's less than 5, so that turns into a 0. The 2 stays the same, and the 5 stays the same because we're not really rounding the hundreds place. So my answer is 520. So it went from 523 to 520. If you can do this in your head and you don't need to circle or underline, you may do that at this time. However, it is kind of helpful to have that visual. So 117, I'm going to circle the tens place, underline the ones place. 7 is more than 5. So I'm going to turn that to a 0. And then I know that the 1 now needs to turn into a 2. and this is a 1. Now I can add. 0 plus 0 is 0. 2 plus 2 is 4. 5 plus 1 is 6. So instead of adding 523 plus 117, which is two hard numbers, I made them more compatible so that I could get the answer. Now is 640 the exact answer to 523 plus 117? No, it is not. However, it's an estimate, and that's what we're doing today. So now, what I would like you to do is I would like you to write 235 and 374 on your paper, as well as 42 plus 36, and I want you to round them to the nearest 10 and solve. You may pause the video if you would like, or you can just let it end and you can finish your work and turn in. This is the ending of 1.3.